I am having a conversation today with my friend Raffaello, who is a sexual shaman and a faculty member at ISTA, which is the Institute for the International School of Temple Arts. I always call it Institute, but it's the International School of Temple Arts. And I really wanted to have this conversation with him because there are several things about him that are very interesting in his teachings, but I've been having a lot of, in my own journey, I've been having a lot of awarenesses, understandings, and practices around energy and around energy polarities, and particularly sexual energy polarities. And when I met Rafa, I met him a few months ago when I was doing a forum on race healing, and I've just his energy and his wisdom just blew me away. So I just wanted to have this conversation with you, with in front of my own tribe, around these topics. And I'm really excited. I told him when he came that I was not going to give him the questions beforehand. I'm just going to surprise him. So today is going to be kind of fun. He has no idea what we're going to talk about per se, but he's going to enjoy it because I just literally spent a night reading through all your academic papers. So I have some things to really chat with you about today. So, but before we jump into all that, Rafa, um, let's start with this. For anyone who is new to you, or maybe even new to these concepts that we're talking about, you've been studying the connection between spirituality and sexuality for a long time. You've done yoga for a long time, you did Tantra, and now you're a sexual shaman. So I know for people who may be new to you, the idea, just the very topic of sexual shaman sends kind of bells off because people are really, we're more familiar, especially in the West now, we're becoming more familiar with what a shaman is, but a sexual shaman, not so much. So could you talk about, just to start this out as a foundation, what in essence, from your perspective, what is it that you teach and what is your approach as a sexual shaman?
Sure. Okay. First, I can't not say that, Jerome, it's such a pleasure to be here with you because what you said about me in that event that we shared, it's really very much the same that happened for me. I was so struck by your presence, your wisdom, and your humor as well. I love it so much, when I feel that mixture of wisdom and humor, like you were saying some amazingly deep things with such a touch of humor and life and beauty and just light shining through you. So I'm very, very honored to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me. And now on to your question, and like we're starting from and by the way, hi to all your audience that I don't know personally, but I'm so excited to be with all of you today. So we're starting right from, a hot topic, and I love that. At the risk of maybe not disappointing, but like deconstructing a little bit the hype and the tension around this word sexual shaman, I see it as a bit of a provocation, to be honest. I am a sexual shaman, that's true, but it doesn't mean that I spend my day, doing all sorts of sexual rites and using my sexual fluids to anoint me and others. I mean, I have done such things and I do them on occasions, but actually, from even the way that I came to this point was a way of inclusion, which means I was interested, and still I'm interested in everything, everything, like everything. That's why I studied philosophy back in the time, because it was supposed to be the love of wisdom of everything. And from that perspective, if I would like to give it a 360 degrees, I'm just someone who does not exclude sexuality from its place in the scheme of things, from its place in the human journey, from its place in the healing journey as well, however you want to put it. So many times I think when people hear the word sexual shaman, they immediately think that this is someone, and I'm leaving the shaman part out for now, but this is someone who is so laser focused on sexuality. I am not. I am focused, if anything, on the mystery, on life, however you want to call it, on the unspeakable. And that unspeakable energy and unspeakable life force also manifests through sexuality in a very potent way, in my understanding and in my experience. So I just do not leave sexuality out of the picture, which means that it has a place in the picture. But it's not the only thing I'm obsessed about. It's not like that everything depends upon sexuality, unless we use sexuality as yet another term to signify life, energy, vibration. Then yes, then we can say that everything is sexual and that the stars are making love with the planets are orbiting around the stars and making love with them, and gravity is sexuality, yes. But then we broaden the definition of sexuality so much, then it becomes another word for life. So that about the sexual part. And about the shaman part, I want to be, both humble and also clear, because I do not claim, to be a shaman in the sense that some lineages have used this word, which I respect very much, and I learn from those lineages every time I can. For me, being a shaman is the characteristic of someone that consciously travels between states of consciousness, travels between words, so to speak, or like ways to interact with the world, and brings messages back and forth. So whether people do it through plant medicine or through dance or through bodily induced trance, through fasting and other practices, to me, they're all shamans. And the way I do it is my own concoction and my own cocktail, as I'm sure you have your ways and your tools. And it is true that many of my tools include the use of sexual energy, both self-activated and also activated together with others who are willing and conscious and prepared to do that. But in that sense, I call myself a sexual shaman, and I hope that can clarify a bit.
Yeah, I what's really fascinating to me, because I am most, and what my work is really focused on, is on helping people heal themselves and understanding that healing is about, excuse me, healing is by the way is turning over into allergy season over here, so I'm in the midst of all of that. But healing is our practice in the process of restoring and returning ourselves to our natural state of wholeness and happiness. That is my definition of healing, like the restoration to our natural state of wholeness and happiness. And so what I want to, because you brought something up and I want to just kind of dive right into this, I want to ask you about it. How sexual energy, well, I guess there's two parts to this question. One is that how sexual energy can help us heal, because I know for a fact that in order to get our wholeness, we have really got to dive into different aspects of our sexuality. I know that for a fact. And I know that in spiritual circles and often metaphysical circles, that piece can be left out. That piece can be often ignored or suppressed. So there's a lot of people that have holes in this area and are not really experiencing the level of wholeness and happiness that can come when that is an integrated piece to us. So I want to ask you, one, what is sexual energy? And how can sexual energy assist us in our healing journey?
Wonderful. Yeah. To me, this is something that I learned and investigated, especially in my years of deep tantric and yogic practices, where my experience was pretty much this, that sexual energy is just energy. There isn't anything specific to sexual energy besides the fact that it manifests in the sexual centers. So, a lot of the yogic practices that I was very disciplined in doing were about moving energy within the body from center to center, from chakra to chakra. And one of the most beautiful and relatively simple experiences that pretty much anybody can have with that is that as soon as you know how to move energy up and down the centers, then lo and behold, sexual energy brought up to the heart center turns into, universal love and compassion. Sexual energy brought up to the third eye center turns into clarity and, penetrating insight into the nature of reality. So the gist of the matter here is that, yes, energy is energy, but it is true that we can recognize denser and subtler forms of energy. If you wish, slower and faster rates of vibration could also be said like that. And what is the realization is that in the body, in the physical body, there is this constant production, of course, in a healthy body. Yeah, when we are out of balance, things shift. But in a healthy body, there is this constant production of energy from the lower centers, from the root and the sex centers. We can call it sexual energy when it manifests in the sexual centers, but actually it's the same energy that pushes us to thrive and survive, to eat when we're hungry, and to avoid immediate danger. That energy is a tremendous power, really, available to the body through relatively simple techniques and tools. And that energy can definitely be used to healing purposes. How? Which is the second part of your question. Well, my first experience of that was when I was perhaps into my fourth year of tantric studies. I was about 30, and I broke my arm. I was snowboarding somewhere and did a stupid thing and broke my arm. It's like stick bone kind of fracture. And the doctors said to me, "Look, it's a very bad fracture, and the bone is all skewed like that, and you need to go through surgery. Otherwise, you won't be able to to turn any doorknobs anymore. You won't be able to make this rotation movement because the two bones will be of different length." And I considered it and I said, look, it's not like a life-threatening injury. This is a good chance for me to practice the use of sexual energy for healing. So I said no to the surgery, and I spent the next 3 to 4 weeks consciously arousing my sexual energy, or consciously arousing energy from my sexual centers, root and sexual centers, root and sacral, and bringing it up through breathing, through meditation, through visualization to my right arm that was the one broken. Literally like giving orgasms to my arm, when I was successful. Most of the time I was doing this by myself and occasionally with a lover. And indeed, it really helped. I had X-rays every week or something, and you could see that these two bone halves started to actually look for each other, almost like almost in a courting each other sort of way, and then join and then create this bubble and then merge and sort of like fuse perfectly. And to this day, I have no issues with my arm. So was that a coincidence? Is there other ways to explain that? Perhaps, but for me, it was very clear. And it was a proof inside of me that any body part, and I'm, now limiting myself to the physical level, but any body part, when it's irradiated with pleasure and arousal, it's almost like it's bathing in a blueprint for life. That body part doesn't want to generate cancerous cells. That body part doesn't want to not fix itself. That body part is stimulated to follow the matrix of life, what Dieter Doom from Tamara called the sacred matrix. It's like a blueprint. I cannot explain it, but it's a blueprint that goes towards life. And to this day, if I have a bellyache, if I have a headache, if I have whatever sort of little disturbance in the body, one of the first and foremost things that I do is I try to consciously create sexual energy, sexual pleasure, arousal. These three things are not exactly the same, but more or less, and then send it to that part of the body, which means literally feeling it in that part of the body. And to my understanding, that's a very powerful way to heal the body, by basically, not giving it anything external, but like letting it bathe and bask in pleasure. And pleasure creates life, and life creates pleasure. And the two of them are so intertwined that, the body responds to that very powerfully.
I just love that you just said that, because one of the biggest things that I would get messages from my soul in my healing journey from terminal disease, that I would get in downloads, because being a channel, I get downloads often. And one of the big things that I would get over and over and over was pleasure is medicine. Pleasure is a form of medicine. It's not the only medicine, but it is a medicine. And what you're talking in pleasure, because pleasure, and so as I went further into that, because I'm a person, I ask a lot of questions. So even from source, if I get something, I got to ask another 10 questions about it. And I was asking, like, why is that? And one of the things that I got was because the vibration of pleasure is very similar to being highly pleased. So when I say pleasure, it's the feeling of being highly pleased, highly satisfied, highly elated, highly ecstatic. That is very close to the natural vibration of the entirety of the soul. And so what's pouring through you, and as you were hearing this, as you were speaking, I was getting more downloads around it. So what's pouring through us as we're experiencing that in our pleasure centers is the energy of the soul. And so you're moving it. And so sexual energy is just another form of the energy of the soul. And you're moving it through from your sexual chakras and centers up into the areas of you that need to experience more of that vibration. And that's always healing.
Absolutely.
It's always that vibration is always healing. So I love that. I love that. I want to ask you a little bit about, because again, when people begin to research you, they'll find that you did Tantra for many years, and now you're in sexual shamanism. And so what is, for you, from your perspective, what is the difference between the two paths?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I did consciously move out of Tantra, classical Tantra, and into a new field that, for lack of a better word, we're calling it sexual shamanism, but this label could change. The main difference, and I want to use a few caveats here, because we don't really know firsthand what Tantra was like back in the time when it basically, originated around India and Kashmir. But the way that Tantra is taught and practiced now, today, mostly, has a lot of beautiful things to it, but it's still, in a way, a path, an ascending path, a path that goes upwards. Yes, it may include sexual energy, but most of the time, what people are taught, what I myself was taught in Tantra school, is to sublimate that energy and bring it up, bring it up, bring it up. For, in the end of the day, the ultimate purpose of enlightenment, samadhi, like flooding the highest centers in the human being with such an intense vibration that the person accesses a state of totality, of union with all there is. That's a beautiful endeavor. That's a wonderful thing to do. And in my understanding and in my experiences, it's not so so strange or so rare to experience those states of samadhi for people who are consistent in their practice. But for me, after a few years, I realized that actually I needed, it wasn't a conscious realization at the moment, it was an intuition. It became conscious years later that I needed to do the full journey, go and back, or, go and return, that I needed to come down. And to come down, I don't just mean to land the airplane, but actually consciously go into the lower realms, to go into matter, to go into also darkness consciously, as just understood as the other end of the spectrum from light. And Tantra, or the Tantra that was available to me, and I had, looked and researched a lot, wasn't the framework that was going to take me in the journey down. I needed something else. I invited something else in my life. So I would say the main difference for me, as I see it now, is that sexual shamanism is a journey up and down. It's not the only one, by the way. There's other lineages and schools that do that as well. And if people are coming, as I was, from a lot of spiritual work and light work, then definitely sexual shamanism can feel like a journey down mainly. It's like, okay, now let's go down, let's go into matter, let's go into the dark places and find the vibration there. Because although it is true that, broadly speaking, matter has a slower vibration frequency than pure energy. It's a whole spectrum, right? But the denser you go, the slower it is. But it is also true that this is a continuum, and therefore, from both ends, we can access the mystery. So as much as we can access the mystery through enlightenment, I would posit from experience that we can access the mystery through endarkenment as well. And my journey into sexual shamanism was a journey of endarkenment. Ultimately, I believe that, or at least my strife, my, longing from my heart is to embrace both poles. After so many years of going up, 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 I need to go down. And Tantra wasn't the right, so to speak, blueprint or tune, for me to go in that direction. I needed a different tune. And sexual shamanism was a different tune, a tune that embraced darkness, that embraced matter, that embraced a lot of other things that were not very, not the favorite in the Tantra that I studied. But in saying that, I love the tantric path, and I recommend everybody who can to study that and go there as well.
Yeah, what you're saying sounds to me, and I mean you said it, but in words, it sounds to me like sexual shamanism taught you integration, like to be fully integrated being. And this is kind of something that I'm been really bringing into my own consciousness in the last 2 years and into my own teachings. Um, because as I'm healing from kidney failure, the kidneys are the balancing system of the body. And so I've had to learn balance. And I've been learning a lot about, um, I've been getting a lot of downloads around the different poles that we exist on and how when we're to have some type of balance there. And this is one of the things I've been saying for that I've been seeing. I even did a thing in my academy where I talked about how spirituality made me sick. And it's because we teach a lot of the things on one pole and we totally ignore the other pole, and not understanding the wholeness of the pole is the divinity, not just one aspect or the other. So like you were talking about, and this is a lot, I used to see this a lot in my, when I was being trained in energy healing and in channeling and all of that. There's a lot of work, a lot of talk about coming up through the chakra system, up, 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 bringing the energy up. But there wasn't a lot of talk about how do you bring your energy down. And what you find, and what I find, as reading people and working with people's energy field, is people who are very, very, very saturated in spirituality and spiritual work. And it's literally, if you look at it from energy eyes, because you're constantly doing this and coming up, you're detached. You're detached from the earth. You're detached from humanity because you're constantly sending your energy up this way, which is going up, which is fine. And that you need to learn how to do that, right? Because you are both. But when you're constantly going like this, and there's nothing grounding you here, so that you look at a person who is constantly doing them. So for example, people who are meditating all the time, people who are going to the ashrams all the time, burning sage all the time, they're trying to get into, seeing the auras and the crystals and all of that, which is all great because I do all of that stuff. But they're not talking about how to understand your true desires and speak up for yourself and say no and feel safe, which is in the lower chakra centers. Those people they have, usual find they have the hardest time being human. They have hard times with money. They have hard times with boundaries. They have really hard times with feeling like 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 life is really enjoyable for them and it's really tasty, and they're always thinking they want to escape it to go over there. And it's because our teachings in spirituality are always about this one side of the pole, which is taking things up and not bringing the wholeness of it. Like, how do you also bring energy down into the body? How do you bring it down into these pleasure centers? Like, how do you fulfill that as
Totally.
well? So I love that you spoke that, because that also brings up kind of this next kind of phase of questions I wanted to talk to you about, which is the polarities, right? So I know you talk a lot
Right.
about, I told you I stayed up reading your academic papers. And so I found some fascinating things in here that I want to talk to you about. And one is the sexual poles, because there's a lot of conversation around these now, in terms of the sexual energy polarities of masculine and feminine. So for people who are new to this conversation, I want to ask you first, like, what do we mean when we're talking about polarity?
Yeah, this is a big thing, you see, because, um, on one side, I would say that probably the words masculine and feminine, in some ways, they're amazing. In some ways, they're very unfortunate because they create a lot of confusion in many people, including myself, for a long time. But to be honest, I haven't been able to find anything better. Sometimes I suggest to people, okay, just think yin and yang, which of course means masculine and feminine, but just in a language that's another language, right? So it's less confrontational, and it brings up less added content, and that's ideal, because basically what we're talking about here when we talk about polarity, from a metaphysical standpoint, we're just saying, okay, look, on some level, we all know intuitively that everything is one, that there is no difference between anything and anything else. You and I, masculine, feminine, that's all one. And even if from a very intuitive level, we have that, that understanding, we have that felt experience somewhere. But that's not enough, right? If we cannot just stay with the understanding of oneness, because obviously there is also all sorts of things, and energies and people and nature. And so there is multiplicity, there's the infinity of forms. Now, when we start to descend from oneness towards the infinite multiplicity of form, the first thing that we stumble upon, the next step down the ladder, if you will, or up, doesn't matter. But when we go from oneness towards multiplicity, we find the two. We find duality. We find the opposites, hot and cold, high and low, whatever. There's so many. And in one sense, we always need to remember that looking at reality through these opposites is just one way to look at it, and that somewhere behind that there is a reality that is transcendent to that. There is beyond that. There is a reality, a mystery that it's not feminine and it's not masculine. It's not yin and it's not yang. But it's very useful to put on those glasses, those polarity glasses, and start to see the world in terms of the dualities that animate it. And one of the most powerful glasses that we can put is the masculine, feminine glasses, or yin yang, because then we start to understand all the manifestation, all the experience of life as well as consciousness as being elements in a spectrum. And from a very early stage of human investigation, people understood that there is some mysterious correlation between the most fundamental duality in reality and sex. That's why they use these words, masculine and feminine, because there is something about how these two polarities meet and sort of like make love, but also at times repel each other, attract each other, repel each other again. That is very similar from a fundamental point of view to what we do, what we feel when we are attracted by someone erotically or repulsed by someone. That's also a form of polarity. It's a repulsion. It's a reverse attraction. So regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of even choices around sexuality, someone could choose to be totally celibate, have no sexual interactions with anyone else, but still clearly feel the polarity of attraction and repulsion. It doesn't have to be sexual, but it is definitely erotic. Like, we could feel it towards an animal, towards a tree, towards a sunset. Doesn't really matter. But that attraction and repulsion is what the tantrics and others tried to explain as one of the fundamental ways to understand polarity. And if we look at it that way, then all of a sudden, masculine and feminine become useful ways. We could change them, we could call them like lunar and solar, and it's been tried before. Or as I said, yin and yang, or Shiva Shakti. But the point is, to boil it down, there is an understanding that unity is one, but then this one in some mysterious way starts to play and diffuminate into a myriad of forms, and it does it through duality, through the constant interplay, lovemaking, a dance, however you want to call it, seduction game between two fundamental poles in the manifested and unmanifested realms. And for the tantrics, these are called masculine, feminine, Shiva, Shakti. It's a way to give names to those two polarities.
Yeah, I have one thing I want to highlight, well, kind of underline that you said was like to understand, because I know that this conversation when we start, because I think this is what was when I used to initially hear it years ago before I started getting downloads around it. I was repelled by the conversation because I was associating the masculine and feminine with gender. And so, and not understanding that this is about energy. So no matter what your gender expression is, no matter what your sexual expression is, we all have masculine and we all have both of those in us, because it's part of the wholeness of us. Like the soul, which I call the soul, people call it the higher self, they can call it source, whatever. But it is the wholeness of it. Kind of like a coin has two sides to it. Like with polarity, it has a head and a tail side, but there's more to the coin because the wholeness is the coin. There's more to just those sides, but both of those sides have aspects. They have different characteristics to them that are needed to be made up for the whole coin. It's kind of the same thing. And so I wanted to ask you, because in some of your, I took notes so that I could ask you these questions here.
Exciting.
You talk about like in your Well, this is the thing that I wanted to ask you, because you talk about in one of your papers. So by the way, if doesn't know, you've written academic papers. You mentioned before you have a master's in philosophy, and I believe you were getting your doctorate. I don't know if that was
Yeah,
something you continued
it's in
pending.
the process. Yeah.
Pending. So so he writes academic papers, and they're fascinating if you want to look him up and study some of those. And so one of the things that you posed in one of these papers is that polarization and operating within, so the sexual energies, we want to operate in our sexual energies when we are in sexual experience or in a relationship with someone. But that polarization is very helpful in sexuality, but not so much in everyday life. And so I want to kind of ask you, why is that polarization helpful in sexuality, but not so much in everyday life?
Wonderful, great question. So to answer that, the first, one important thing to say about polarity, and this goes for masculine, feminine, and for any other polarity. So let's think about a non-sexual one, like hot and cold, right? We understand clearly that hot and cold is a relative sort of like attribute. I might be hot in temperature relative to the table in front of me, but yet I might be cold in temperature relative to the light bulb, right? So depending on you need another pole in order to say, this is hot or this is cold. And the same goes for masculine and feminine. We need the polarity only exists in relationship, in relating between entities. So that's very important for people to understand, that there isn't such thing as like being absolutely masculine or being absolutely feminine. It's a relationship. I might adopt or feel or embody a masculine polarity relative to someone else in this moment, and then the next moment things may shift, and I might embody a feminine polarity in regards to another person or to the same person as before. Everything is possible. And yet, in this constant play and dance of polarity, there are patterns, there are, observable tendencies. It doesn't just shift like that, randomly or haphazardly. So once we understand that, then your question can be addressed with more background, because basically, once you start having an eye and an antenna or a nose for polarities, once you start smelling, this game of polarity that's constantly going on, then you can feel whether a situation is highly polarized or not. And let me give you, a practical example. This is why maybe what you were referring to. When you are with a hot lover, new or not new, doesn't matter, and you're looking at each other and almost about to touch each other, maybe touching each other, maybe dancing, maybe making love, that's obviously a highly polarized situation. The energy, the tension, electrical tension almost is palpable, and it's like buzzing. Great, amazing, juicy, wonderful. On the other side of the spectrum, when you are at work with your colleagues, and I have to laugh when I say this because obviously it depends on the kind of job everyone does. There's so many different jobs. So I'm kind of like taking a big stereotype here. Like office, you're in the office, and you're working on something on the computer, and a colleague is next to you. Ideally, you don't want that situation to be a highly polarized one. You don't want, like this tension to be running, constantly between the two of you, because it's just creating a loop of energy here, when actually what we're trying to do here is be pretty much in the same pole as teammates, as co-workers, and perhaps then be polarized towards something external, maybe a customer, maybe we want to seduce this customer, ethically, just as inviting them. But we don't want to have that polarity going on between the two of us. That would be distracting. So it's not that, polarity isn't good for everyday life. There are situations in everyday life outside of lovemaking where polarity is really awesome. If you're a salesperson, for instance, and you're not able to create some sort of game, some sort of polarity with your potential customer, then probably you're not going to sell a lot of whatever you're selling, right? There can be a use for polarity in situations that are non-sexual. And in the same way, lovers and partners sometimes just want to lay in bed together with a pretty neutral, non-polarized energy between them. And that can be very comforting. You can even make love in a non-polarized way, and it can be incredibly healing as well. However, I think the getaway here is when we refine our ability to feel the charge, the electrical intensity, then we can, to some extent, tone the sexual polarity up or down according to what's needed, according to what's being called for. And so again, like if you look at parents with children, that's a very good example to make. Parents with children need to be so masterful at navigating highly polarized situations and totally non-polarized situations. One moment they're with their child and they need to be really on the same team, like we're both looking at something, we're not polarized, there is no charge, but we're looking at something and running a charge, if anything, with something else. But the next moment, good parents know that sometimes they need to seduce their children. I'm not talking about anything sexual here, but about, sort of like playing seduction, playing, oh yeah, you're all quiet, and silent there in the corner of the room, but let me be the opposite so that I can entice you and tease you out of it. It's just an example. So that's a polarized situation. There is a courting going on there. And that's what I call sexual polarity. So sexual polarity is not just about sex, it's about that dance of opposites. And basically, the basic law, if you will, of it is that the farther the two poles go to a limit, the higher the polarity between them, the higher the energy, the higher the tension between them will become, which is the same as in electrical circuits, where when you have a higher difference in voltage between the two poles, then the tension becomes higher. Obviously, there is a limit. If you go too far away from one another, the two poles, you could create a situation where polarity cannot even travel because the two poles are too far. So, it's a whole universe of play, and I don't want anyone to think that, you should, there's no should, that you have to be like highly polarized in bed and zero polarized when you're out of bed. It's more complex than that. It's more about recognizing what's the gift of being highly polarized with someone, or having that tension, and what's the gift of actually not having that? And how can we navigate so that we are masterful in a way that creates a situation that's ideal for what we're trying to do in this moment together?
So with the understanding of that it's a dance between the polarities, right? And both, it's a dance of more really holding and embodying one in your sexual play in a relationship, but also it's a dance between being more fluid and moving through the two in your life. Since we've been speaking about polarities and duality and masculine and feminine, what are the aspects of the two energies that make them like, so if I am someone, whether I am male, female, trans, non-binary, whatever, if I am more masculine energy embodied, what are the qualities that let me say it that way. Let's break it down like that. I'm a more masculine energy embodied person. What are some of the qualities that I will probably exhibit?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And I want to preface that, it's sometimes a little bit risky to put labels, because people tend to make big generalizations about them. Like many times when I'm in a workshop setting, for instance, nowadays, instead of giving people a breakdown of what is masculine and what is feminine, I prefer to bring them to the body. It's so funny. If you put on a piece of music and guide people into, okay, now let's dance this from our feminine energy. Doesn't matter, the gender, doesn't matter the sexual orientation, pretty much with maybe a few props, like a few verbal props. Pretty much everyone will start moving a little bit like I'm moving right now, like in a more wavy, circular, spiraling, flowing way. If I ask the same crowd of people, maybe put on a different piece of music and say, okay, now let's dance this one from our masculine. And people will tend to move more like, in straight staccato movements that are linear, that are A to B, that are directed. And that's actually, just even in those words or in those movements, there's a lot of wisdom to unpack. Because it is true that on a fundamental level, what we understand as the masculine pole tends to exhibit the qualities of direction, of linearity, of purpose. When I say purpose, I mean, the fact that something is moving from A to B, the intention of moving from A to B, a very simple level. And on the other side of the spectrum, the feminine pole in all of us tends to exhibit the qualities of wave, of circularity of motion, or spiraling of motion, and also of flow, which is different from purpose. Because if purpose is like, going with intention from A to B, flow is also movement, but is the movement of, I don't know where I'm going. I don't need to know. I'm just in the flow. So moment by moment, this movement is happening. That's the feminine way to move. But again, I don't want anybody to make, a title out of that, or this is the masculine, this is the feminine, because it's a subtle distinction, but at the same time, it's very easy to access. Sometimes actually, the less we think about it, the easier it is to access it. It's just like by dancing or moving. If we want to go to, there's so many ways that so many directions that I could bring that, but one fun one is, the quantum physics, and just a microparticle understanding of energy and matter being able to be understood. Let's take, the case of light. Photons can be understood as particles or as waves, right? So in a sense, that's also a masculine feminine polarity, because particles is what masculine energy looks like in that framework. A particle is moving from A to B in a straight line unless something intervenes to change its course. And a wave, on the other hand, is the feminine way to look at photons, at light. It's like waves are not moving in one single direction. Waves are expanding. Waves are irradiating in the sense, and they are wavy. They're curved. They're not linear. So even in that level of subatomic physics, you have a way to look at things in this wonderful duality. And I want to add one last bit here, which is a good add-on to that. Just as in physics, basically you could say that this duality between wave and particle is a paradox, right? Because it's not that you are one or the other. You can be one or you can be the other, depending on the observation, depending on the measurement, and basically until a decision is made on one or the other, a particle is both, photon is both a particle and a wave. It's like a paradox. It's a paradox. And this is what all polarities and all dualities tend to look like when you look at them deeply. So this is why, incidentally, I don't believe that it's possible to teach total integration, except that if we recognize it as a mystery, as a paradox, as something that we can circle around, but never quite nail or explain. Because by definition, the whole picture is a combination of things that are opposite to one another, of things that are incompatible for the mind to one another. And that's the mystery that I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, I've in continuation with kind of your concept that you were ending with kind of there, you said something about how we are, as human beings, we're complex beings. And so do you believe that there are certain, like, we move within these energies differently in different situations? For example, someone could be more masculine energy dominant in their relationship, but actually feminine energy dominant in work. Um, or they're very masculine energy dominant in their finances, but very feminine dominant in their health. So it's not
Totally possible.
so it's not that. And again, as with my learning around it and with the downloads that I've gotten, which a lot of this is right centered into, um I see that a lot. Like, we're not, um we cycle through, and even in different relationships, you could be like, some people think they have a certain pattern where they're always this, but a lot of times you play in these different aspects. Like, you may be more masculine energy in this relationship, but you are more feminine energy in this relationship. um and so I wanted to bring this thing up. Maybe this may be the last thing we talk about in interest of time, because it was something that around a download that I received. And when I read this in your paper, I was like, oh, I have to speak to him about this and see what he thinks. So you talked about how, in Tantra, that men are usually masculine or yang in their physical body, but or yin in their energetic body. And the opposite is true of women. They tend to have a yin physical body and a yang energetic body. Could you talk about, what you mean by that? It's like the difference between the physical body and the energetic body, as they could process with that. And then I want to share with you my download around why this kind of, I was jumping up and down when I saw this.
Yeah, so it's really all a crisscross of, it's like a checkerboard in many ways. So in a tantric understanding, there's several bodies that we all are or possess. Physical body, energetic body, and more, the astral body and others. And on a simplified level, we could say that there is an alternative to that. So whoever is, as you said, like, predominantly masculine or yang in their physical body, is oftentimes the case that goes to the other polarity in the pranic or energetic body. But then again, you'll find the masculine predominance in the next body and the feminine predominance in the next body as well, like in a checkerboard. It's a very, sort of like very esoteric and complex subject that I just can skim in this moment, but it is true. And this is also why, because we have such a crisscrossed structure, on one side, we are able to access all, both polarities of the spectrum. But on the other side, it is also true that the range of masculine to feminine expressions that we have is not the same for everybody. Some people are much more flexible and, so to speak, malleable or can shift a lot, and others can't. And this depends on a lot of things, including energetic makeup, but also just training, and cultural conditioning, and whether we have or haven't learned how to dance. For example, for me personally, one of my biggest learnings in moving from Tantra to sexual shamanism was how to access my feminine energy in a conscious, powerful, and eventually deliberate way. It's been a long journey. It's been a lot of work. So when we start to look at human beings as a sort of like, in 3D, really, not just as a silhouette, but as a superposition of different bodies that are contained into one another, kind of like Russian doll style, like like that. So then we see that actually what is being shown through the physical body, which is what most people look at, maybe with some perception of their energetic body, but generally, we tend to make our idea of someone based on their physical body, and we say, oh, that looks very masculine. But 900%, 100%, 99, maybe not 100, but like 99% of the times, if we look deeply, attentively enough, we can recognize that just like within or together with that very masculine looking body, there is a very feminine, energetic body coexisting with it. It's just not visible. It doesn't have the same physical visibility of the physical body, but it's there. And time and again, people who go into deep relationship with someone who's looking very polarized to this end of the spectrum, whatever you want to call it, will find that their energetic body or their emotional body is very much polarized to the other side of the spectrum. It's almost like nature is looking for a compensation there. But it's important to remember that even in this game of counterbalances, we are all different from one another. Just like a tree doesn't naturally grow all its branches on one side, it will grow also some on the other side. But then again, every tree may have a very different proportion of branches on one and the other side, and this makes every tree unique and different from the others. I hope that kind of like answers. It's like a very, very deep question, and I would love to expand more on it, but I know that I tend to ramble on, and this is like a wonderful opportunity to ramble. So I'm going to stop myself here, just like take a breath.
That was beautiful. And it may be we may have to have another conversation another time, because I'm going to drop this, and then I don't think we have time to really probably fully go on it, but I could not leave without sharing this with you, because I wanted to share this with you here. So in 2020, I received a lot of channeled messages, and I did several videos around. This is when I first really started to speak about the polarities. I wasn't necessarily calling them masculine and feminine. That wasn't the how it came to me at first. How it came to me at first was ego divine, and that they were connected, and that they were also, I know you also wrote a piece on the brain, and that they were connected to our two sides of the brain. So the masculine being more left brain, the feminine being more right brain, the ego being more left brain, the divine. What I mean by divine, again, the soul is the whole of it. So it has the divine and the aspect. So the masculine side or ego side being the side that is most that was created. So both of these things are divinely intended. They're created for this human experience, for us to have these polarities. This one was created, the masculine is really here for us to be able to experience and to explore the perspective of the self. The feminine being, and again, these weren't the words I got. So it was the ego and the divine being for us to experience the perspective of the we. But we need both, and we need to move within both. And if we're ever too far on one side, we develop issues. Like when we're too far on the we don't have boundaries. We don't get our personal values and our personal dreams and things met. We're too far on the self. We lose compassion and empathy, all that other kind of stuff. But the part that I got so interested in when you were talking about this part with the men are usually very masculine in their, masculine physical body, but feminine in their energetic body. The dilemma was really about how the soul comes here to explore, which is in many spiritual teachers and many sacred teachers out there, that the soul is here to explore how to be, express, and expand the unconditional love that it is, right? Unconditional love that it is. But that love in duality, unconditional love in a realm of duality, of polarity, has two poles. and that is to be loved and to be loving. Together, it's the wholeness of what unconditional love is, but to be loved and to be loving. And the masculine is like the when it's in the fullness and it's in balance, it's the energetic body of the masculine really is, because it's in the self and it receives self, it is loved, it gets loved. And the feminine energy is the loving, nurturing energy, right? But so to have that both, when you talked about the energy body in both, I can, so from the outside, like men are very seen as the people that are, I don't want to, actually, matter of fact, I don't want to dive too far in this. We're going to have another conversation around it. I just wanted to give this thing about how it connected with being loved and being loving, and how these were also two poles of us that require certain things and behave different ways and have different qualities, but that we move within both in different circumstances, and we need to. And how
I
what you're
definitely want
talking
to.
about this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I definitely want to watch those videos with those downloads. So please, once we finish this, send me the links, because I want to get the whole download. And I remember speaking about you with this polarity, ego and divine, and it was so eye-opening for me as well to see it from a different perspective. I think, yeah, there's something really, really deep in that.
Yeah, we'll have another conversation, because a lot of what you were sharing in your papers may tie into, because I wasn't getting it. Again, I wasn't getting it from this language. I had never studied the masculine, feminine stuff before. I was just getting these downloads about this. And then these conversations started to come out, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. And I can see this here. And this is what it was talking about. And oh, this expands on that. So I'd love to have this next conversation about how the masculine and feminine ties in with the brain, and then also how it ties in with our soul's purpose of being loving and being loved. So I'll definitely connect back with you with that.
I'm already looking forward to that. It's so good to have these conversations with you, Jerome. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. My deepest honor. For anybody watching you, where can they find you? How can they reach you?
Yeah, easiest is my website, is my name, Raffaello. Now I said it like more with the R, but Raffaello.life. Yeah, so it's an easy one, my name.life. And also, as you shared before, I'm a lead facilitator in ISTA, the International School of Temple Arts. ISTA's website is ista.life, so ISTA.life. And then there I also have my profile page where people can see, for instance, all the trainings that I teach, if they're interested in joining one. On the website, by contrast, they can find, as you did, the academic papers and other musings and writings and more resources.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Raffaello. And
thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. You will be back. We have more to discuss. And until then, my friend, much, much love and much thanks.
Thank you.